To leave that there and take you to the New South Wales Health Minister, Brad Hazzard.
Testing. Is the ABC doing strange things?
Yeah. Hang up, did it?
Kathleen. Hello? Do you want to fix up? Are you there, Kathleen?
Apologies, we're just waiting for Brad Hazzard, the Health Minister, to get started on this news conference.
Obviously, there are huge pressures occurring at the moment in relation to PCR testing in New South Wales, and it's proving very, very difficult for our residents. I've encouraged, in the strongest possible terms, the Premier of Queensland to revisit her proposition that she will change the testing arrangement for travellers into Queensland on the 1st of January. Obviously, that's still a few days away for us in New South Wales. And the rate of testing that we are doing far more than any other state or territory. And the net result of that is there are incredible pressures on our pathology laboratories, both the public ones and the private ones. I ask again of the Queensland Premier to please revisit the situation. I know she's indicated that she will revisit it on the 1st of January. That may not seem like a lot of days for her, but it is a lot of days here in New South Wales for our residents who are trying to get to Queensland on what I would refer to as tourism testing. But it's also putting enormous pressure, it's putting incredible pressure on the clinical needs of testing here in New South Wales for people who really need to know whether they are or they are not positive to the current virus. I will continue to ask the Queensland Government to bring it forward, because in any one day we're getting between approximately 100 and 150,000 tests a day. And that is an enormous number of people. It could be 750,000 of a million people who are having tests in the next few days here in New South Wales. And anything we can do, anything at all, to remove some of the pressure would be extraordinarily helpful. The other issue is that we have Queenslanders. I'll say this directly to the Queensland Premier, that we have Queenslanders who are in New South Wales who are actually having to get tested before they return to Queensland. I've had reports this morning of many vehicles in queues in the Byron area yesterday who were actually bearing Queensland number plates. Clearly they have an issue as well. They can't get home unless they have a PCR test. Obviously everything we've done in the last 2 years in relation to this pandemic has been a challenge of balancing risks. And the risks here are, we have a lot of people now who are positive. We would be far better with... Is that helicopter getting in the way? Yes, it is. From the look of everybody on the cameras. It's a Channel 9 chopper. Sorry, Kathleen, if you can hear me. I can't hear anything now because we've got a Channel 9 chopper right above us. Will I persist or will I hold until the chopper goes? What's your... From the look of everybody's face, we hold, do we? Okay, we hold.
So Brad Hazzard speaking there to media in Sydney. We're just waiting for that chopper overhead. But you might have heard there, focusing in on that testing. Here he is again.
So what we're seeing now is tourism testing, which is actually putting additional pressure on an already very, very tested system here in New South Wales. I want to thank all the frontline pathology workers, the health workers in New South Wales. They continue to do an incredible job under massive pressure. But I would ask the Premier, please, the Premier of Queensland, I would ask the Premier of Queensland to please just rethink the 1 January issue. We appreciate there are issues in Queensland as well to be managed, but we believe they can be adequately managed, both for your own residents and our residents, by actually introducing rapid antigen testing, but certainly dropping the need for the PCR testing. I want to stress also that I understand New South Wales residents who have gone to Queensland are struggling to get tests in Queensland as well. They require a day 5 test, and all the evidence coming out of Queensland is many of those people are spending the first few days of their holidays simply worrying about whether or not they'll be able to get that PCR test on day 5. and many of the testing facilities in Queensland currently, as they are in New South Wales, are under pressure, but they're also shut either partially or completely, as some of our private ones are here too, because of the stress on staff and the Christmas holidays. So all in all, putting it simply, it's time that the PCR tests for tourism testing were dropped, preferably today, Premier, is my strong request to you. Politely and courteously I say this to you, we need to understand that rapid antigen tests make more sense for people who are about to cross the border. And I would also stress one final point. If it's taking up to 4 days, sometimes 5 days to get test results, it's pretty illogical to actually require those test results as people cross the border. They might have been negative on day 1 when they had their test, but they could well be positive on day 4 or day 5 when they cross the border. So on all fronts, there is no logic in continuing the PCR testing for people who are effectively bringing tourist dollars to Queensland. Questions? Kathleen, I'll just do everybody here first, if that's all right.
We spoke to people in the queue yesterday, in one of the queues, and all of them had valid reasons for being there, including travellers who were required, international travellers who were required to get a test on day 6 for fear of a fine. There are pregnant women sitting in the queue because hospitals are requiring them to have tests every 3 days. People waiting for surgery are required to have tests, and they're all just sitting there for hours and hours and hours. Yeah,
look, let's just deal first of all with one issue, being the pregnant women who are having tests. I've asked New South Wales Health to review what is going on there. It appears that is primarily a requirement of private hospitals, not public hospitals. And I've asked the New South Wales Health Department to work with those private hospitals and try and convert them also from PCR tests to rapid antigen tests. We are now in the era, in this pandemic, of rapid antigen tests making more sense in many cases than PCR tests. And that's certainly the focus of the New South Wales Government at the present time.
But what about those international travellers?
International travellers. I've also raised the issue with both New South Wales Health and the Federal Government in regard to whether or not we can ease back, if not completely remove, on the testing for people coming in across our international borders. That is under consideration, as I understand it, by the Federal Government. Primarily would have to apply, of course, to all borders, not just New South Wales. I know I've discussed those issues with the Victorian Health Minister, and we're keen to see what else the Federal Government might be able to do on that front. But the primary issue for us is certainly at the moment a range of issues primarily focused on Queensland, and we will continue to work with our Queensland colleagues to try and bring about the necessary changes.
Going further to the pregnant women,
yeah.
We're hearing reports of nursing homes as well, people waiting for up to 5 days. Is the rapid antigen test something that's likely to be brought in for them as well?
Rapid antigen tests are absolutely the way forward. Most people in aged care facilities, which of course are under the control of the Federal Government, are actually already well and truly vaccinated and quite possibly boosted. So the logic of requiring PCR tests there may also be seriously under challenge. We need to look seriously, very seriously, at all these various pressures on PCR testing in our laboratories. New South Wales by far does the most PCR testing in the country by a long shot. And 2 years ago, when all this started, we thought we were doing well when we had 40,000 tests a day. We've managed to achieve, by engaging public and private facilities, up to 160,000 a day. That leaves every other state and territory in our wake. But it also says that if that's where we've got to, we need to find alternatives. And the alternatives are definitely to go with rapid antigen testing. Now, initially, when rapid antigen testing came into Australia, it was required by the federal regulatory body to be under clinical supervision. In the last few weeks, it's become freely available to everybody. Doesn't matter whether you're at Coles or Woolies or your local pharmacy or IGA, generally there are rapid antigen tests available, and they make more sense. Certainly from my point of view, I attended functions pre-Christmas and post-Christmas, and those people were asking people to have a rapid antigen testing at their homes. It's a good, safe check, and I would strongly encourage the broader community to engage with that.
How concerned are you by the reports out of St Vincent's pathology? 1,500 people, 1,400 people getting the wrong results. Many now, it seems, were positive.
Yeah.
Could be as many as
Obviously, as Health Minister, I'm very concerned about that outcome, but I've also spoken to the Chief Executive of that private hospital and made sure that they have reviewed their protocols and procedures, and he's given me that guarantee. It would appear to be, from the discussions I had directly with the Chief Executive, that there was an error, a human error, and unfortunately, when people are under pressure, human errors become more frequent. So certainly anything we can do to relieve pressure more broadly will assist.
Just one back on the before that, you said New South Wales testing has grown exponentially. We obviously have
dramatically, yeah.
And it's credit to a lot of people. But given that's the case, is there a way that people who have underlying health issues who are waiting 5 days for tests, is there a way that something can fast track for those specifically?
Yeah, look, the problem really is under the current structure that very long queues build up, and it's very hard to delineate between those who are there for sound health reasons and for a range of other reasons. But I've certainly asked Health to look at that. When the numbers were less, we actually, and when health staff were not as exhausted, we had engaged councils and health staff to walk the lines. And this is some months ago now, but it really has reached the stage where the staff are exhausted. There just aren't the capacity anymore to have additional staff walking down those lines and asking the questions that need to be asked, particularly when some of those queues are 3 and 4 kilometres long.
Yes, on Queensland, what was your initial reaction to the Queensland Premier's position?
Look, I expressed very strongly my views yesterday, and I have to say that was probably because I'm, just as many people are in New South Wales, exhausted and had it with some of the actions that have been taken by the Queensland Premier. But at this point, I would rather work constructively and encouraging her today to just think about it and to work, as I'm sure she can, with all of the authorities here in New South Wales and indeed in other states, to just make it that much easier for New South Wales residents and returning Queensland residents, and for that matter, tourists from every other state in the country to get into Queensland.
You know, it's New South Wales Health asking new mothers to get tested before they can see their babies in intensive care, in neonatal intensive care.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Eddie?
You know, it's New South Wales Health asking new mothers to get PCR tests before they even see their babies when they're in intensive care.
I'm not aware of that, so I can't really comment on the specifics, but I'm not aware of it. What I will say is this, just anything that is being done that would get in the way of mums seeing their babies or mums being able to deliver their babies in the easiest way possible should be absolutely minimised, and I've asked Health to look at those issues. Okay, everybody. Kathleen, do you want to ask anything else?
Oh, yes. Could I just quickly a couple of questions? In regards to the testing, during the Delta outbreak, New South Wales was routinely doing 160,000 tests a day. You're laying quite a bit of the blame for the delays and the pressure at Queensland's feet, but are you actually just trying to distract from the fact that the system is now not coping with the huge numbers of COVID that we're currently seeing?
No, nothing. Everything I and the New South Wales government have ever done has been to keep New South Wales residents safe, and we will continue to do that. This is the entire focus of what we're doing.
So, but why bring the attention on Queensland Health? Like, where is the system falling down? The system is exhausted. There are people who have been at the front line doing pathology, literally in some cases. Some of these laboratories work through the night, and they're exhausted, and they need to have staff taking breaks, and the additional pressures of what's being required by the Queensland Premier obviously make no sense at all. And I'd add to that, clearly she knows that, because she's indicated that come 1 January, which is only a few days away now, she may well change that. All we're saying to her is, can you relieve the pressure now? We're all in agreement that it doesn't make sense. Even she's in agreement, but she just hasn't moved to actually make it easier. And just going to Eddie's question about new mothers, we've got parents coming to us who are going through that at Westmead Hospital. They're having to get tested to see children in neonatal care. So can you confirm this review that you've called for will extend to new parents, not just pregnant women?
I think I just said that. Yes, I will.
Yep. Okay. And
And that's Brad Hazzard there, the New South Wales Health Minister, putting, pressure on the Premier of Queensland to announce a decision around whether rapid antigen tests can be used rather than PCR in order to get into Queensland. Last week, Premier Palaszczuk said that she was waiting for medical advice on that very question, but it didn't seem likely that a decision would be made before the 1st of January. And the Premier of Queensland said that she was going to inform the community when that changed. Brad Hazzard there saying that he's encouraged the Queensland Premier in the strongest terms to revisit that situation of testing, has described it as tourism testing, and says that there is incredible pressure on clinical services while thanking those frontline health workers.